Good afternoon. My name is Cerise Griffith, and I am the Senior Director for ULI Los Angeles's District Council for the Urban Land Institute. The mission of the Urban Land Institute is to provide leadership and responsible use of land in creating and sustaining thriving communities. We provide timely content for knowledge sharing among those in the land use and real estate professions. On behalf of our team, I welcome you to the first virtual event and the first panel presented by our ULI-LA Diversity Initiative. We had over 350 people register for today's event, so we're very, very glad to have everyone here. There is, of course, far more to this timely topic than we could ever cover in 90 minutes. Our panelists have been kind enough to agree to share a little snapshot of their professional practices and share advice with us today as well. Before we begin, we have just a couple of announcements and housekeeping items to go through. We want to thank our annual sponsors. Sponsors allow ULI Los Angeles to provide informative content year-round, and we are very grateful to them all. Second, I just want to share with you some of our upcoming events. On August 11th at 6 p.m., we'll be presenting YLG. Our Young Leaders Group will be presenting an evening with .LA co-founder and CEO Sam Adams. On Thursday, August 13th, we will have a virtual case study, panel discussion, and site tour with We3 at Water's Edge. In a series of Thursdays, September 10th through October 8th, we will hold our 20th annual Urban Marketplace. Information about all of these events is on our website, with the exception of Urban Marketplace, which we will be sharing with you as soon as we can post that information. Finally, just a few housekeeping items to maximize the experience for everyone today. Please mute yourselves and turn off your video. This helps the Zoom platform run much smoother with so many people joining us. With regard to questions for our panelists, please use the chat room feature to submit all of your questions. We will be monitoring and pull from those questions during the Q&A portion of the program. I now have the sincere pleasure of introducing the co-chair of our diversity initiative, David Abosta. David is Director of Development for Primester Development. David? Hello, David. Are you with us?
Okay. Hey, hello. Thank you. The Diversity Initiative Committee of ULI was founded over 2 years ago with a mission statement to increase people of color and LGBTQ involvement in ULI Los Angeles as active participants, content leaders, and leaders in the industry of real estate in Los Angeles. To that end, we've worked to perform a series of tools and conversations surrounding this important topic. Most importantly, we started this conversation in a different time, in a different place, where it wasn't as in the forefront of people's minds as it clearly is today. We're very proud of the work we've done to date, but realize that we've only made a very small contribution in a very long-term effort inside of the industry of real estate in Los Angeles. We've created a series of tools for other district councils to start grappling with the topics involved today, as well as internal committees and other organizations throughout real estate. We hosted a series of mixers and other sort of events related to specific target groups that we feel are helpful to bring people together to begin these important conversations. We've put together additional metrics and really started the process of gathering the kind of important information that relates to who our membership is, who our panel participants are, and other such items that are really necessary to really understand the magnitude and the level of challenge ahead of us. We are very humble in this approach and are very humbled by the level of interest that has come to this panel today. We're very excited to welcome this panel and are very fortunate to have young leaders such as Ada who's our moderator today, to lead this important conversation. Ada, I'll just leave it off to you from there.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ada Penn. I'm a senior analyst with HR&E Advisors, and we provide economic and real estate advisory services. And thank you again to our co-chairs, Seth Merritt and David Apasta, as well as other members of the Diversity Initiatives and ULI staff, Cerise and Lisa, for all your inputs into planning this session and making this a free event to all ULI and non-ULI members. And joining me today, we have 4 wonderful panelists. They are Gabrielle Bullock, Director of Global Diversity and Principal at Perkins & Will; Garland Fuller, Senior Diversity Recruiter at CBRE; Alicia Bramble, President for African American Real Estate Professionals, AREP LA; and Keandra Claredot, Executive Officer for Equity and Race with LA Metro. And we will have more time to hear each of them on their self-introduction with presentation slides later. But before we start, we do want to recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion in the built environment is a very expansive topic that intersects with many different aspects of the real estate industry. From redlining to discriminative planning, environmental injustice, there is just a long list. And today, we hope that we can provide some key takeaways, particularly on how DEI plays a role in the workspace, and also through your professional work in the real estate industry. And as the event champion, I have been involved at the local chapter on some of the diversity initiatives since earlier this year, and also started collaboration with some of the minority real estate organizations, including AREP. And I personally also joined the DEI training right before the shutdown at my firm, HR&E Advisors, and I actually have another one coming up next week. But it's still a very rare opportunity for us to share this topic and discussion with such a larger and more diverse audience, and hearing experiences from these DEI officers on some of the existing conditions, challenges, and solutions to this important topic. And before we start, we also prepare a quick poll questions. Lisa, you can pull up the poll questions now, because we do have a large audience and we want to help our panelists and everyone to know who we are with today. And these should be quick questions to just get a sense of who we are with today. And we'll leave it up for 2-3 minutes. Great. So it looks like today most of our audience are from the private sector. We do have some from the public nonprofit schools as well. And we have a lot executive level participants today at your organization, and also senior and middle management. And in regards to the biggest challenge, 23% of the participants select systematic barriers as the biggest challenge, followed by lack of awareness and recognition of its relevance. And in terms of some of the existing strategies that your organizations are currently implementing, over half of the respondents are providing community service activities pro bono services already. And also a large amount of respondents are providing unconscious bias training and health and well-being programs. And we also have 25 participants from outside of Los Angeles today. So thank you everyone for the quick warm-up exercise. And now we will move on to our panel discussions. And Lisa, you can pull up the presentation slides now as well. So we'll start with Keandra. you are the first equity and race officer with LA Metro. I understand this is a newly created position. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and your agency, as well as your background, how you started this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada, and thank you, ULI, for hosting this event and having space for this type of important conversation. So, as you mentioned, I am Metro's first Executive Officer of Equity and Race, and prior to this position, I have had a career in community development, starting as a housing attorney and then shifting between nonprofit and local government work, but always covering housing, transportation, and/or planning, policy, and development. And I joined Metro about 6 months ago, so I'm fairly new. The position is new, and our work focusing on equity is relatively new. So I want to talk a little bit about the basis of our work, which is our equity platform. But first, I did want to share a little perspective on Metro. As an agency, we're a large agency and very unique transportation agency with over 11,000 employees, and we serve LA County as a transportation planner, a coordinator, designer, builder, and operator. So we have a lot of different core functions that apply across different types of land uses. Now, just jumping back to the equity platform, the basis of our work. Our board passed the equity platform back in early 2018. And the core objective of that platform is to increase access to opportunities. However, it recognizes that there are barriers that prevent everyone from equitably and justly accessing opportunities. And when I say opportunities, I mean education, housing, jobs, etc. And so our platform really tasks us with understanding what those barriers are and how do we address the root causes of those barriers through our work and exploring what that looks like to create more equitable outcomes. So that framework, it stands on 4 pillars. The first pillar is define and measure. And under this, we're tasked with defining what is equity, defining what are the target communities that are in need of more equitable access to opportunity, and how do we measure that? And what does that look like when we're measuring the equitable outcomes that we're striving to achieve? The second pillar is our listen and learn pillar. And this one is really focused on how we engage with the community that we serve to better understand their needs and to make sure that our decisions are reflective of those needs and better address those. This also incorporates, the next pillar is the focus and deliver pillar. This one incorporates the first 2 pillars. So after we've defined and we're measuring and understand what the disparities are around equity, and also once we've kind of ground truth that information with the community by understanding their unique experiences, then our task under focus and deliver is to incorporate that into our projects. And so part of this is looking at our processes that allow us to get to have that process, and then also making sure that we're looking at different outcomes, different from the traditional outcomes that aren't specifically focused on the way people experience our system, but are more focused on just kind of generally providing increased service, etc. The last pillar is the train and grow pillar. And this is really important because it focuses on Metro as an agency and our employees. This is looking at not only do all of our employees understand what equity is and how it fits into their job, but it's also looking at, what's the diversity of our agency and is it reflective of the broader LA community? And is that reflected at all levels of the leadership within the agency? And then also, is our agency an inclusive place where people feel like they can truly be themselves when they come to work? And what are we doing to support that? So collectively, these pillars help us to really focus our efforts around equity. But one important thing that I did once I came in is to make sure that we also had a definition of equity. And so if you go to the next slide, and it's really important to have a definition because in transportation, at least, and perhaps more broadly in community development and different aspects of it, when people talk about equity, often they mean geographic equity or equality, et cetera. So it was very important for Metro as an agency, for our stakeholders, for our employees and our board to define what equity means for us. And so here's our definition, which I wanted to share with you. Equity is both an outcome and a process to address racial, socioeconomic, and gender disparities to ensure fair and just access with respect to where you begin and your capacity to improve from that starting point to opportunities including jobs, housing, education, mobility options, and healthier communities. Next slide. It is achieved when one's outcomes in life are not predetermined in a statistical or experiential sense on their racial, economic, or social identities. And then next slide. It requires community-informed and needs-based provision, implementation, and impact of services, programs, and policies that reduce and ultimately prevent disparities. So through our equity platform, we are focused on improving outcomes and processes to identify and address disparities so that everyone can truly have just access to opportunities. And as I like to quote Angela Glover Blackwell from Policy Link, equity cascades up, it doesn't trickle down. So we really have to focus on those who are faring the worst to understand how to reduce those barriers and make sure that everyone is able to receive access to opportunities. And that's the goal of our work. And with that, I'll pass it back to Ada.
Thank you, Keandra, for providing us a really good starting discussion on how Metro is leading the conversation on equity. And we will move on to Gabrielle. You are the most senior DEI officer in our panel today. And I know that you're also a licensed architect. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and your work.
Okay, thank you, Ada, and thank you, ULI, and hello, 194 people. So I'm Gabrielle Bullock, and I am an architect with Perkins & Well. I've been with the firm I'm in my 32nd year. I am from New York, and I was in the New York office of Perkins & Well, so I've been with the organization a very long time. I've had various roles in the firm. I was managing director for the Los Angeles office. I've been the first of many things at the firm and in the profession. And that's partly the reason why I decided in 2013 to design and implement this program and focus on diversity. At that time, diversity, inclusion, and engagement. I am one of 488 licensed Black female architects in this country. And I'm frequently the only one in the room. And I want that to change. And I think it should change. I think not only is it good for the culture, but it's good for our clients, it's good for our work, for us to be more diverse. So 7 years ago in 2013, when I implemented this program, the focus, as I said, was on mostly diversity and inclusion. I will say that today it's JEDI, and I'll explain that in a minute. But really our mission was, we believed that inclusion and diversity made us more innovative and more engaged culture and more successful. So why wouldn't we want to do that? And then also as a global firm doing work all over the world and a lot locally, why wouldn't we want to mirror the society that we serve? So that was our mission and our vision. And we weren't just focused on Perkins & Well. That was one of the focuses, building a culture of EDI, where everybody can bring their whole self to work, where we represented the communities that we served, but also to help advance the profession. And then to build the pipeline. And because I'm one of only 488, clearly there's a pipeline problem. So it was a threefold goal of the firm, the profession, and the pipeline. Next slide, please. So over the 7 years, we've established some strategies. We have a structured program, and this is very important. This is not a fly-by-night, do it on your own time committee. This is a funded effort. I spend 50% of my time leading the JEDI strategies and mission for the firm. So for all of those who want to start a program, make sure it's funded, because if it's not funded, it's not valued. So we've structured our efforts, both from the top down, me leading the Diversity Council, as well as each studio, each office having a champion, a diversity championing. So it comes from both ends in developing the strategies that are both unique to locale, as well as firm-wide initiatives. And there are several categories that we work on, from culture to recruitment, retention, et cetera. But the point is, we look at everything through the JEDI lens. Now, JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And when we started, justice wasn't in the equation. And of late, we decided that, you know what, justice really is what we're after, justice and equity in particular, because if you think about diversity and inclusion is the end game, right? That's the outcome. But if you look at justice and equity, what are we doing in our work, in our firms that are either adding to systemic racism, injustices, inequities? What can we do to fix that? And then the outcome ought to be a more diverse and inclusive environment and culture. So that's JEDI. So we've established strategic plans around the 7 areas, not these on the screen, but 7 areas that are measured every year, annually, and throughout the year. And some of the strategies that you might want to use that we do is we looked in the mirror. Where are our gaps? Where are we not being diverse, inclusive, or equitable? And that could be anywhere from, I'll give you an example. We recognize that not only do we not have that African Americans were the largest gap of the demographic of our organization, it's also the largest gap in architecture. But we also realized that there was a gender problem. We also realized there was a pay equity issue. So if you look in the mirror at every practice area and everything that you do, and be honest and transparent about where your challenges might be to get to a more just and equitable organization. Then of course you have to have action. And someone shared something with me not too long ago around the movement that's happening now. You know, this can't just be a moment in time, because movement implies action and move. So I'm hopeful that if we all put action forward, we'll solve some of the issues that have been around for a very long time. It does mean taking a risk. You have to challenge the status quo on almost every level to get to the root of problems that are inhibiting us from being a more just and equitable and diverse society and profession. And then there's social justice and equity, which I really think applies to our work. You know, are we just applying design strategies, design thinking, the way we've always done them? Well, this is a largely male, white profession that I happen to belong to, and it always has been that way. The education was as homogenous. So if we dismantle and break down all of the sameness of how we've approached things, then I think that we will find new ways, better ways, more authentic ways to address the work that we do, the people that we hire, hire more diverse talent to get a more rich and authentic response to the work that we do. And that leads me to cultural competency. When I was working on projects in Saudi Arabia, I recognized that our teams were not consistently culturally competent. They weren't doing the research, and we were applying a Western Eurocentric design aesthetic and design process on the work, which was not culturally authentic. So research was huge. And then, of course, once you establish a plan of action on how to become a more diverse and inclusive organization, you have to measure, right? You can't change what you don't measure. You can't see if you're making any progress. So we have an annual report, both qualitative and quantitative, for our efforts across the firm. Now, the firm is international, it's 27 offices, so it's a lot to track. Next slide, please. So I think through our work in the last 7 years, we've been successful in building a culture of awareness. I'm not saying we're there yet, because even up until now, race was still the messy, uncomfortable word that even Perkins and Will, with a focused effort on this, had difficulty addressing head on. It was always the thing, oh, we'll talk about that next. I will say that we have embraced it head on in the last couple of months. It is top of mind, and we will continue to advance it. And I encourage you all to, but it's not easy. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. But on the good side, so Destination Crenshaw, if you're not familiar with it, it's an outdoor art and cultural experience on Crenshaw Boulevard for about 1.3 miles, both sides of the boulevard, that we are working on. And this project is really the proof that I've been looking for the last 7 years to really demonstrate the value and the success of a project that is not only community-based, it's community-led. The community is a design partner. The client handpicked our team because not only of our expertise and talent, but because we represented that community. There was a shorthand connection between us and the client, which made their lives much easier and more comfortable. They didn't have to explain why certain aesthetics wouldn't be appropriate, or how people would use a park, or what people would do with the art space and things like that. So this project is my pride and joy. It's the first project that I've ever had that had a client that looked like me. And I've been in this profession for decades. So I'm not going to tell you how many. I knew somebody would laugh. So I will stop there. I think a next question comes up, so I can go into further about the project. The program. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Yep.
Yeah, and thank you for introducing us to JEDI. My firm, Attorney Advisor, also launched a Just and Resilient Recovery Initiative, and we call it a JAR. And I'm sure a lot of our audience today are looking for these program strategies to see how we can capture this unprecedented time in order to build a better and hopefully more equitable new normal.
Yep.
And next we will have Garland Fuller with CBRE as their Senior Diversity Recruiter. So Garland, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do as a diversity recruiter.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Garland Fuller. I feel like I've been in commercial real estate for about 7 years, but I'd say the past almost 2 have been with CBRE. I come primarily from an HR talent acquisition standpoint. So compared to some of my fellow panelists, I focus more on the recruitment side of things. And I'd say most of what I'll be talking about today is going to be primarily from that standpoint. I don't want to say haphazardly, but I literally had no idea that D&I recruiting would kind of be where I end up, because when I started in real estate, I don't think I was totally aware what I was walking into until I literally started. My first day on the job is, I think, when I realized, oh, wow, this is going to be different. And it, I think, has been what has fueled me to do this work, because it makes me feel as though there's a lot of opportunity to make change. And there's a lot of opportunity to, represent, similarly to what Gabrielle said, represent the communities that you serve by working on those projects and being in those meetings and having a variety of perspective. All right, so we're basically focused on, I'd say, making sure that what diversity means at CBRE is a competitive advantage. So as I was saying, in terms of what diversity means at CBRE, it really is, I could say, the traditional things people think about when they think about diversity: gender, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation. But also I'd say, looking at leadership style, thinking, diversity in terms of ability and experience. And so it's not just all of, I'd say, the typical things that you think about. In terms of, I'd say, what we've been doing as an organization, we're, I'd say, in the infancy stage. I'd say we recently appointed a Chief Diversity Officer beginning of this month. In terms of our diversity journey, I'd say it's probably about 3 or 4 years old. The important part I think people need to remember is it has to be a top-down initiative. This focus on D&I came from our CEO, Bob Salentic. It's essentially a big part of all of our lines of business. I'd say for a company this scale, it is definitely an investment deciding, hey, this is where we want to focus our attention. So when people say, how do I start or what do I do? I think the first thing you do is make sure you've got buy-in, and the folks who are running your organization are totally ready to do what needs to happen. As Gabrielle said, it's not a short-term, oh, if we try this out for 2-3 years, let's see how it works. This is a long-term investment, not only in your people, but in terms of your innovation and creativity, in terms of your productivity, in terms of the results and the outcomes that you get. The research shows that diversity produces all of those things. And so it's not, I think, just looking at it in terms of, oh, we just need to hire a few people and maybe form some committees. Like, this is a ongoing effort. And so given that we're kind of, I say, in the early stages, I'm continuing to evolve and look at what we need to do. It's definitely something I'd say CBRE is invested in and is committed to doing. If you look at, this slide here, it really is about it infiltrating everything within the organization. So we've got employee network groups as a great way for us to, create inclusion centers and ways to get everyone involved and create allyship. We have a supplier diversity initiative as well to make sure that we're incorporating minority and women owned businesses into who we, again, do business with. We also work for, with the military because I think sometimes, you may not think of military as part of diversity, but it is. And then in terms of, how our clients are responding to it, I mean, we've won awards and are doing, I'd say, fairly well with, of course, a longer runway. Next slide, please. So finding partners, I'd say, is a big part of doing this work. It's a big part of finding the talent. Everyone says, the pipeline's not there. The pipeline is there. It's just maybe you're not tapped into the pipeline, and maybe the barriers of entry of getting into your organization, you may have to do a second look to see what is it that we're doing. So recently, I'd say maybe last year, we've instituted this policy that if you are in a director level and above role, we would like to ensure that there is diverse representation in terms of your candidate slate, as well as in terms of diverse representation on your interview panel. So when you're participating in the recruiting process, you're not just going to make a decision without looking at, okay, we need to ensure that we're getting a variety of both gender and ethnic and racial representation in both the candidate as well as the interview panel. How do we do this? We work with a lot of different organizations in order to, find candidates. I think the thing that's interesting with commercial real estate, particularly in the entry-level side of things, is that, it's a really easy place to grow talent. I think in the executive side of things, it gets a little more difficult, but it's definitely important to have those partnerships so that you're able to really, I'd say, speak to why this is an industry. I feel like a lot of the time I am educating folks about what commercial real estate is, especially around communities of color. It has more of a residential picture that comes to mind. And so oftentimes people aren't thinking about commercial real estate. So what's been really great is kind of having an opportunity to do more outreach to let people know, wow, this is not anything that I thought I would be interested in. But once they hear about it, there's a lot more information that they have attached to it and more interest. Next slide. Not only do we have local partnerships, but we have national partnerships. With these national partnerships, often comes going to conventions. And these conventions are large places, again, to find more talent, but also to brand our organization as an employer of choice. We also work with organizations like REAP, which is essentially an opportunity for people to get trained and certified. Organizations like Out and Equal, Posse Foundation, CREW, Prospanica. We also are working with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. So again, you don't have to do everything depending on the size and the scale of your organization, but whatever you do, I'd say be consistent with it. Determine that this is a relationship you want to continue and make an investment over time. Because again, you won't see instant results, but if you continue to, be a partner to that organization and not just, write a sponsorship check, but actually, find out what they're looking for. What do their members need? What is it that you feel, you would like their members to know? It really is more than just transactional. It's very much investing not only in that organization, but say a win-win in terms of how both of you can fulfill your missions. Next slide. So advantage through diversity is, I'd say, really what we're about. If you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, if you can, go to that link. If you'd like to connect with me, I'm pretty, I'd say, easy to find on LinkedIn. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Garden, for sharing your journey and also your contact. And I'm sure we will have more questions in the later discussion part. Alicia, you have a very empowering minority professional organization, ARAP, and I think Garland also mentioned she has been a member since 2015 as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself and ARAP.
Thank you. Thank you, Ada. Thank you, Cerise. I'm really glad to be here. It's been great working with you guys. As Ada said, my name is Alicia Bramble. I am president of African American Real Estate Professionals of Los Angeles. We normally just say AREP, not to be confused with AARP, because I don't fit the age range to be into AARP. But I'm also an affordable housing asset manager, and I have been for the last 15 years. I've worked for various affordable housing developers and investors. AREP started about 15 years ago with several different chapters throughout the US. So LA isn't the only chapter. The first chapter was started in New England, believe it or not. And that was considered our national chapter. And then we had branched out. So since then, New York, Washington, DC, Los Angeles, and Charlotte, North Carolina have also started chapters of AREP as well. Our mission is to advance the economic development of our members and engage the community through outreach and mentorship, which are some of the newer programs that we've been developing. AREP, more specifically in LA, was started by veterans in the real estate industry right here in Los Angeles. Next slide, please. So in addition to our current advisory board, which you see on the screen, there are several well-known industry leaders that also started AREP. Troy Jenkins, Keisha Freeman, Chris Lewis are just a few names that started the organization in 2013. So we organically promote diversity through our programs, our networking events, our partnerships, our mentorships, and our community outreach programs that we are developing for our youth. In addition, Garland mentioned earlier, we also create programs, and we've been doing webinars that promote the different realms of commercial real estate There may be different positions within the industry that people aren't aware of. So we've been talking to other African American leaders in our industry that can promote to our youth, right? To our coming up generation. AREP-LA is also its own network. We network within ourselves, and we're able to be a part of an organization that already embodies diversity. So if you look up diversity in the dictionary, our picture is there. Our logo is right there because that's what we're based on. You walk into a professional setting when you come to our events, and you're welcomed with people that look like you. And it just empowers you to go out into your community and to lead and to do more networking, and the opportunities are endless. Some of our partnerships since our initial origination in 2013, and then our more recent rebirth in 2018 is with CBRE. CBRE is probably one of our biggest supporters, and we definitely appreciate their support. Garland and I have developed a great relationship, and we have a ton of think tanks all the time to develop some programs and events for our organization. Cushman and Wakefield is another organization that that supports us. ICSC. And even recently, Avanith Capital Management has been a supporter for our past events as well. We are constantly in talks with different partnerships with ULI, for example. You know, we started discussing a partnership in January or February, I think, Ada, right? We started talking about a partnership a long time ago. We also discussed partnerships with IREM-LA. And then more recently, we've also discussed doing joint ventures and joint events with New York, DC, and New England chapters. And so, you know, essentially we want everyone to know that AREP-LA has been around, or AREP itself has been around for quite some time. And it's not something that was, you know, just developed. It's been around for over 15 years now. You know, our partnerships are really important to us. We want to be accountability partners. We want our partners and our sponsors to be able to depend on us for that additional information that they need, or just that push and that help in the right direction. Next slide, please. So this is our board. Our board is comprised of a very vast, a majority of professional industry, commercial real estate industry leaders, from appraisers to representatives that work for CoStar. We also have property managers and capital fund investors. So having these people that have such a vast knowledge of CRE experience really helps us to further our programs. Next slide, please. And so this is our contact information. Our roster is only growing, and we're only building our professional networking. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. And we will have a more open discussion now, and also a reminder that we are taking questions towards the end of the session, and please feel free to send in your question through the chat box. And I guess I will start with you, Keandra. In your presentation, you mentioned about the 4 pillars, how your agency is defining equity. And the first one is define and measure. And I'm sure a lot of the public sector participants with us today are interested to know how Metro is defining and measuring the equity piece.
Well, thank you for the question. So I shared our definition of equity earlier in my introduction, but I think this is a really good question because a lot of my work within my first 6 months has been working throughout the agency, meeting with different departments, et cetera, to talk about language and to talk about how we define equity, how it's different from geographic equity, which we've historically really focused on, and making sure, you know, every region has their piece of the pie without regard to specific need. and also talking about how equity is different from diversity, which oftentimes, you know, when I share our definition or I talk a little bit about why we're trying to understand what the disparities are in a different project or with a service, et cetera, some people will ask, well, you know, what about this group and this group and this group? And I say, well, you know, we do support diversity, and it's important to recognize the range of customers and the range of employees that we have. And that's something that we value. But equity is more focused on understanding what are disparities based on those different type of demographics, and how do we address those to make sure address and reduce and ultimately eliminate those to make sure that we're actually serving everyone and meeting their needs, meeting them where they are so that they can better access whatever they need for their mobility needs. And so we have our definition of equity. We also have a couple of, we've created an equity liaison group internally, which has members from every department, and we are going through the process of learning and unlearning some things to help us to advance this work around equity. And it really starts with language. So thank you for that question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kendra. I'm interested to hear from Gabrielle's perspective, as your title is the Global Diversity Leader, and interested to hear how you feel like the private sector is having the discussion on equity.
Well, I can count how many hours I've been talking about this since May 25th. The profession, I think, is having the conversation. I think they're just starting to have the conversation. And I hope that the conversations continue and that the conversations lead to action. This is a very uncomfortable time. There were uncomfortable conversations, but they're not going to go away. And so find ways, have it facilitated, read a book, self-educate yourself. These concepts of racism, systemic, structural, institutional, equity, access, awareness, all of those things need to be understood so that we can all collectively operate under the same charter on how to break down those barriers, because at the end of the day, all of our clients are going to ask for the same thing. One of our clients, Metro here, is going, I mean, right? So if we're not doing it for our own, for ourselves, our culture of our organizations, let's do it for our clients. Let's do it for our communities. It's gone on far too long. So that's how I think we're doing. But these kinds of conversations are absolutely critical. And that's why I'll do another 8,000 hours of it if I have to.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
You're welcome.
And Garland, I think I've heard of your name a lot even before we connected for this panel. And as a diversity recruiter, I'm sure you have a lot of difficult conversations within your organizations at a different level. And a lot of our participants, for their organizations, they might be just starting that effort like you did 7 years ago. So share with us some of your biggest challenges and what are your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, I think it's a little easier now because we are having the conversation, whereas I feel like before it was like, you have to bring it up. And then when you have to bring it up, you have to like gauge the person's response to determine if this is like something they're going to be open to saying. I think what's changed is I've got a role where diversity is in my title, which is kind of good and bad. It's good because when they see me, they know this is something they may hear out of my mouth. The bad part of that is sometimes people think that means it's your job and like everyone else's doesn't have to do anything because it's Garland. She's got the diversity job. So she's gonna make this work for us. And diversity is a group effort. It's like in everyone's job, invisibly, maybe not in your title, but visibly it is everyone's responsibility. So I always encourage, I'd say the challenges sometimes are getting leaders to understand that they are honestly the best champions and advocates and ambassadors for this, more so than I am. I can, advise, I can recommend, I can do all of these things. However, if someone sees a leader do something transformational, something very, kind of like going out of their way to be inclusive, asking someone else and amplifying someone else's voice in the meeting. When they see the behaviors of you as a leader doing that, that speaks more than anything I could be doing. Because what I do is really more, I feel like, I measure things, I ask questions. From a recruiting standpoint, I make sure we've got a good slate of candidates. But I am not the one who's going to hire this person. At the end of the day, I facilitate the connection, but you as the manager are the one who, has the final decision on who gets hired. This is the conversation I get in with managers often is you've got 2 or 3 candidates. They're all somewhat equally similar, but one person, their communication style may be a little different, or somebody's got maybe a year or 2 more experience or less, and they have to pick somebody. And it's looking at your biases to say, am I picking this person because I really think they're the best person for the job, or am I picking them because I think it'll be an easy fit on my team and I won't have to do as much because they'll fit everything that we're already doing. Having those conversations, I say, are sometimes challenging because you're then having to get into equity, you're having to get into race, you may be getting into culture, and culture meaning not just like, racial culture, but like LGBTQ, abilities. You're getting into other conversations, and I don't think have enough of those conversations sometimes in our personal life. So now I'm bringing it to work. Now I'm like having you talk about stuff that you probably would not talk about. You would not talk about if it wasn't that. And then some people think, oh, it's
Not
just
on
this one
purpose.
hire. It's just this one hire, this just one time. And the thing is, if we take that approach, this hire, this one time, times how many people we hire all the time, this is how we sometimes, have a trend, a pattern, something that we keep doing. So, I'd say those are the challenges, is leaning into those conversations. I think it is tough because depending on the culture of your organization, someone's empowered and emboldened to make a decision, they make a decision, no one questions them, right? Like, why would you question this person? Well, now I think because we're, forming more committees and looking at our practices and looking at our processes, now we're starting to question everything, which is good because that's how you realize, okay, wow, maybe one person shouldn't make a decision. Maybe we need to have 2 or 3 people in the process and have a variety of, people from different backgrounds as well as different departments getting involved. And so it's not just this unanimous, we just make the same decision over and over again. And it's hard, but I think we're seeing now what happens with the groupthink, when everyone has the same thought and everyone thinks the same way, we get the same results, but are those really the best results? They're working, but are they really the best? Right. So that's I'd say the challenge I see sometimes.
And following up on the recruitment part, how about like retention of people of color talent?
Yeah, this is where our employee network groups, I'd say, are really important because, and I can say this as somebody, I join all of them so I can get all the distribution emails and see what they're doing. But 2, I think getting involved with the groups is huge. Particularly, I say people of color find them important because this is how they find other people who may be having a similar experience. And it's an opportunity to network. So if you're looking to advance your career, you need to kind of know who's doing what and what skills you might need, what licenses you may need to get, whatever those things are. Those are the things that we're doing internally. Allyship is just as important. So I say this very clearly, because you are not a Black male or not an Asian woman or not a Latina doesn't mean you can't join these groups. So allyship is even more critical because I think how you learn about what is important to all of these groups is by being in the group. How can you advocate? How can you amplify? How can you mentor, sponsor if you're not involved with the groups that need the most mentorship, sponsorship, amplification? So I really encourage it to not be just, this is an us thing. I think we need to like get to this place of the people of color over here, the white people over here. Like this is everybody's responsibility. Everyone may play a different role. Some people may need to do more learning than others, but at the end of the day, we all need to realize this is something we all have agency in, responsibility and accountability to do a good, you know, the next best thing. It's really, really important for us to use these groups as a way to really continue the learning, because that's the only, and the conversations, and, you know, having it be uncomfortable and realizing the only way you're going to learn is by kind of putting your foot in your mouth time to time. I mean, I do it often.
Yes,
No one is exempt.
definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of us, all the panelists have a lot more examples to share through your work and also personal interactions with people in the field. And Alicia, we're very curious to hear how you view as the current condition of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the real estate sector, because I'm sure there is a reason why AREP exists. And also, I heard that a lot of your members really value a lot on AREP providing them as an empowering organization.
Yes, that's a great question, Ada. You know, not just me personally, but I think, you know, our board, our members, in this current climate, and having this discussion about D&I diversity, I think that AREP already, like I said before, embodies diversity, and you know, that's what we're looking for in our professional setting. It's something that we've recognized that's needed in the commercial real estate industry, and so we've created our own lane. We've created our own organization. You know, one of our board members the other day was saying AREP is important to him because it provides a space for underrepresented African Americans to network with and to learn from. We love to learn from our veterans that have been in the industry for many years, and they've paved the way for the next generation. It's a place where we can celebrate each other, where we can showcase our talents, because in some ways we feel that the rest of the industry does not do that. We feel that sometimes they don't do those things. So the current conditions in some ways have not molded to benefit all African Americans in the commercial real estate industry. So we're feeling kind of the same way that we have for a while. There needs to be a change and just a different approach to diversity in the commercial real estate industry. I think we're also saying about the current conditions and the discussions that are going on, I think we're kind of breathing a sigh of relief, and we're saying, you know, under our breaths, finally, because this is something that we've been saying for a very long time, and we're really glad that the conversations are even taking place. And we just want to be heard, you know, understood on some of why the practices are the way that they are.
Thank you. And before we take questions from the all the participants, we do want to hear a little bit from our panelists exactly what Alicia was just saying. What has been changed in the past few months, and what areas do you see that's not changing yet? Gabrielle?
What's not changing?
Mm-hmm. I think just one thing that has changed in the recent discussions that we're changing is it's an increased awareness and just increased dialogue that we're having in the wake of everything that's gone on in the last 60 plus days. There's always been protests. There's many organizations that have been formed to eradicate racial injustices. There's people that have built their careers around civil rights. And the difference is we're just now realizing that these inequalities exist. That's most likely what has changed, is the awareness and the dialogue.
All right. Well, in the architecture and design sector, what's not changed is the demographics haven't changed, right? So, and that's what that is the biggest gap and challenge in the profession. And that is why a lot of firms and organizations say, well, there's no pipeline, I can't find them or whatever. So that's where the focus needs to be, is to build the pipeline for the future and mentor, outreach, engage the HBCUs, hire minority firms as partners. You know, we have to just, because it's not just that we can't find them and they're not there. That's not an excuse any longer. For me, it was never an excuse, but it's not an excuse, because we can no longer design and build culturally incompetent environments for our communities. So hope that wasn't too harsh.
Kendra?
Yeah,
So-
no, I wouldn't say, so I hear this pipeline thing all the time. As a recruiter, it drives me crazy because particularly at the entry level point, everyone is an opportunity to be bringing into your organization. But of course, I'd say within architecture, you do have to go to school for that, but you can definitely find a lot of architect students who are in a lot of different organizations. Like,
Well,
you know,
that's, you know, you can, but honestly, it's a very expensive education. It's a 5-year program. It's arduous. And frankly, most children of color are not introduced to architecture. So that's one of the focuses that I think everybody who's in architecture has the opportunity to talk to a middle schooler, talk to an elementary school person, elementary student, right? So there's only a pipeline issue because we haven't engaged our youth.
Absolutely. And Gabrielle, I think that's really important that you said that, because AREP is in the process of forming some of those programs where we can go talk to our youth from elementary to junior high to high school, not just at the HBCU level, but we want to get in their heads that commercial real estate, no matter what position or realm of commercial real estate that you're in, is a great, and it can be a very lucrative career. And so if we can get to them a little bit younger, we can start creating that pipeline of architects, of young African-American men and women that are graduating high school and looking at buildings and love and see that they want to build that or design that one day. And so you're also paving that way, especially for our youth as well. And we have a lot of respect for that.
Keandra, any thoughts from the public sector?
Yeah, from a public sector perspective, and also, you know, thinking about the transportation industry, I think there's definitely been an increased willingness to have these conversations, and especially about racial equity. I think even in my first 2 months before COVID, before the civil unrest, there was some hesitancy within the agency, within the industry, to talk about race in particular. Equity was fairly easy, but when I brought up race, you know, someone mentioned it earlier, having to kind of wait, see the response, but all of a sudden that has really changed, and there's a lot more direct and intentional discussions about race equity, but also how we shift from conversations to action. But in that same vein, what hasn't changed is, and part of this is because, you know, our struggling economy and the way it's impacted local government. But there's this, I am constantly having these conversations about whether equity is expensive and whether it requires us to do extra, and I have to pull the conversation back and talk about how this is about spending what we have equitably. It's about focusing on need instead of focusing on just, you know, average benefits or giving every area their piece of whatever we do have. And so I think what needs to still change is the way we think about and understand equity, as well as diversity and inclusion, but also our willingness and the ways that we look to do the change. Part of that is making sure we're not just working at our desks in silos in the office, because equity is not about that. We have to engage the community. We have to meaningfully engage, not just outreach. It needs to be a two-way street. And that's something that's been critical, especially during this COVID crisis where we're not able to meet in person. We're not able, like, we're connecting in a different way, and that has caused some challenges. But I'm always reminding my team and the folks that I work with that we got to find ways to engage with the community, because it's really important, especially right now. We need to understand changing needs and understand how that helps us move forward. And yeah, we're all smart and great and everything, but we can't solve it and figure it out from our desks. And so I think, yeah, between a willingness to think about to genuinely think about new ways to do the work and new processes to advance equity, those are some of the things I would say need to change that haven't yet.
Thank you, Kendra. And we have received a lot of good questions in the chats.
Questions in the chat.
And so we will have to be quick in order to go through more of them. And a common question that has been asked by various participants is on the tools to measure. So I think it would be helpful for panelists to share maybe some concrete examples on matrix tools that your organizations are tracking, and also in a way holding your teams and firms accountable. I know Gabrielle already touched a little bit on that, but I guess a little bit more detailed examples would be helpful.
From me? Me?
To all panelists. Yes, Gabrielle, please.
Oh, okay. Yes, so we do have tools. We call it a progress tracker, and it tracks everything that every office said they were going to do. Again, we don't tell them what they're going to do. We give them the broad buckets and the overall goals. They decide locally what they're going to do. They report it, and I look at it and see if they threw the kitchen sink at it and really didn't do anything last year, right? So, and that's part of sustaining this effort, is to constantly look at what you're doing and does it measure up to what you said you were going to do and the overall mission, right? And competition goes a long way between one office to the other, right? So it's all published in an annual report.
Got it.
I'd say it's hard to answer this question because I think it depends on where your organization is in this.
Mm-hmm.
You first need to find out where you are. So getting that data is number one. So if you don't know how many people actually even are interviewed, yet alone get hired and made an offer to come to your company, then you're not even sure if there's a pipeline problem or not. If you are looking at, who is in middle management and then moves into executive, and you don't have numbers on, where the people of color sit, where the women are, like if you don't know anything about what's happening, you're not even tracking this information now, or you are tracking it, but you're really not looking at that information, you're not really paying attention to it, just start there. Just start by looking at what you're doing, because that will tell you more about what you need to be doing more of or where you want to focus. I find commercial real estate focuses a lot on gender, and gender is important, but when it comes to ethnic and racial minorities, it's like not as much of a focus. So that talk about race and not really wanting to talk about it, well, it's getting talked about now because you're realizing in a lot of these rooms, there's just not a lot of ethnic minorities in any of these spaces. And then when you look at, levels, and so we're focusing on director level and above because we looked at the data and realized, oh boy, we're not really seeing anybody get to that level and then even further. So you kind of have to look at where you are and what you're doing before you start putting data, use the data to inform your strategy instead of just coming up with something and thinking this is what we're going to need. if you can get your hands on some information, it'll help you to determine kind of where you want to go.
Exactly. And I would just want to add that there's both qualitative things that need to be measured and the quantitative demographic information. And the two are very different, and many organizations just focused on the quantitative, and that's where you get tokenism. And that's where you get diversity, but no inclusion and no equity.
Right. Keandra, Alicia?
So just 6 months in, we aren't quite there yet as far as metrics. But I appreciate the point about the quantitative versus qualitative metrics. You know, early on, I was having conversations about, you know, just kind of asking around some of our senior leadership, like, you know, what for advice on as I develop this implementation of our equity plan, and folks always reference the data. But I do appreciate that, you know, we can't just rely on the data. It's so important to look at the experiences of how people are using our system, how employees are feeling at our agency, et cetera. So to that end, there are some things that we do already that I think, you know, there's ways to kind of explore how we're doing it on the equity and diversity front. So one example is we do annual employee surveys. And we just started that about 2 years ago. And one thing that has come up that I've found since before I came was this issue of making sure we are an inclusive place to work, and better supporting our affinity groups. And just there's a lot that we can do and that we've learned from that survey, from talking to the employees. And I think that is certainly one place to start, as well as, and part of this is my work is internal and external. So there's so many things that we cover, but I think it's really important for us as a public agency, even though our mission is to serve the public, we can't forget our employees too. And surveys, focus groups, partnering with affinity groups, those are different ways to gauge that, at least from a qualitative perspective.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, not sure what kind of feedbacks do you usually hear from the members, but do they have challenges when they go through interviews and bringing up these kind of diversity questions?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that that's always even a conversation that I have to have with my members, because it's things that I just know that we all have experienced at one point in our career. Either interviews or not getting a call back, or just being stuck in the same position and not being able to move forward, even though you've done the necessary steps to move forward. So, you know, we have some of those conversations in some of our meetings, some of our networking events. And those sometimes are just side conversations that we have about, you know, how we advance. And so again, that's what AREP is there to do, is to empower and to educate, to help educate our members and help them to move forward and to move up the echelons of their organizations, or to grow their own small businesses. Our roster is not just brokers or CRE professionals, but we have architects, have real estate attorneys, we have property managers, and then we have people that are in the multifamily space as well, like myself, who look to AREP for those particular things.
Thank you. And also a lot of questions we got is related to the specific real estate industry. As we previously mentioned, demographically, it is not a diverse industry. So especially at the senior level, how are all of you really pushing the how we measure DEI from a simple representation and recruitment to a true diversity and equity in terms of having leadership and decision making? Garland?
That was a big question. Can we make it smaller, and just what specifically this question? I'm looking for it in the chat, just because maybe if I read it, it'll make more sense to me.
Yeah, so I can read it out again too. So how do we move from recruitment and looking at just the number to real diversity of leadership and decision making? And then I'm combining it with another question was talking about the real estate industry. There is a lack of diversity at senior leadership level.
Got it.
Is that, is it sort of, you know, like I said before, is it just getting them in the door, but there's nobody at the top, or they don't advance? So, you know, that's what you have to look at, because that's, I mean, that's not good in any time, right? To not.
Yeah. So look at the board. I go back to the board a lot of times because everyone's got a board of that they're accountable to for something. And so if there's no diversity on the board, then we need to get some diversity on the board, because the board will then look at the leadership and say, yeah, we need more. Like, everyone's got to understand this is not a groundswell from the bottom. This cannot work if it's just, you know, people who are at the entry level to mid-level saying we need diversity. Like, it doesn't work like that. It has to be a variety of voices at the table saying this is important. I would go so far to say that if your organization isn't making this a priority and it's a priority for you, you may need to evaluate whether you want to continue to work at this organization. Because it's a situation where you can talk about diversity, but if this is not a core value, if it's not a pillar, if it's not something that is showing up in the meetings all the time, not just like on the website. If you're not seeing it in your company, like, you need to basically determine whether this is a place that's going to work for you, because it's one thing to say we value it, it's another thing to see it every day.
Right.
And it's one thing to see people are working towards it and people saying they're interested, but they're not working towards it.
Right.
There's like, it's hard. I wouldn't say, oh, we're just going to hire a bunch of people in the C-suite and in the senior level, and then it'll be that. As Gabrielle said, like, it has to be inclusion, meaning these people are basically given responsibility to do whatever they feel like they need to do to make these changes. It's not just about tokenism. Oh, we're going to put a bunch of people of color or women in some positions, and then we'll look on paper like we're so amazing. No, it's basically saying we want this person because they've got everything we need to be successful, and we strongly believe this is not a lowering the bar. This is not a, you know, I think we need to get off of the, you know, this is.
I only hire the best.
Yeah.
Don't we just want the best?
Right. Would you say that it's an important question to ask on an interview now moving forward? Like, you should be asking the organization that you're looking to go to, what are their diversity efforts? What kind of programs? What are they doing to ensure that, you know, diversity is valued at the organization? What are their missions? What are their goals? Are those new questions that are going to be coming up for people to start asking?
I think it's already happening. I really do. Because if people don't see themselves in the organization at the top or at some level, if they don't see themselves, and why would they even think that they could excel at that organization?
Right. I think we are approaching the end of our discussion, and I do want to say another thank you to all of our panelists and our co-chairs and also our staffs for putting together this panel. And this is definitely not the last equity-related discussion we are going to have at ULI and also at your own organizations. And as a member of the diversity initiatives, we also want to welcome more inputs and to continue this conversation. And so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This is Cerise Griffith with ULI Los Angeles, and I just want to thank everyone again for being with us. Ada, for your hard work in putting this panel together and working with us as a ULI team. Gabrielle, Garland, Keandra, and Alicia. It's been a true pleasure having conversations that led to this conversation. And so it has really been a joy and a pleasure. And we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We are just getting started in this area. A couple of wonderful ideas came up. And I wanted to, one of the things I heard Gabrielle say was that if you're not doing this for the culture of your own organization, do it for your clients.
The communities.
And your communities. You can really make a difference. And we are delighted to begin to partner with more and more organizations like Alicia's. And this has just been a true pleasure, and I appreciate everyone that's been involved. Thank you, David Abasta. Thank you, Seth, our co-chairs, and thank you to our committee. And thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.